A stock option grant. What is it? You'll often hear this when someone asks you, did you receive stock options? Did the person have stock options? Were they granted options? That's what those folks are talking about when they ask those questions. They're asking, was a grant made from a company, usually to an employee or a consultant, sometimes to a corporation? Was a grant made that gave that person or entity options? If you don't know much about options, go watch our videos on those subjects. But that's what this grant does, is it's the action of handing out options. And it's also a lot of the rules associated with that grant of options. So some of the rules we're going to discuss are, and these are common rules inside of stock option grants, are the date of the grant, the vesting schedule, the rules associated with vesting and the time frame, the exercise price, the expiration, and the type of options. If you don't recognize any of these words, then go watch videos on each of these. But the date of the grant is important because that's what begins vesting. Vesting, just as an overview, is how the options become yours over time and under what circumstances. The exercise price, as an overview, is how much the grantee has to pay to turn the options into stock. The expiration date means that if you don't decide to turn the options into stock at a certain date, the grant itself expires. And then there are different types of options. There are non-qualified and incentive options are the two most common. Also, the options grant itself is going to reference something called the equity incentive plan, and that's usually attached. There's details on what the equity incentive plan is in our other video, but that's essentially all of the rules governing the options themselves. Also, the grant may include something called an exercise notice and an investment representation statement. The exercise notice essentially says, here are the rules to how you exercise this. And the investment representation statement says, hey, you know what this company does and you know what the company's up to. There's going to be no big surprises about this entity for you in the future. So important about these grant documents, and then we'll go look at an example, is that the grants need to be signed. You got to keep records of assigned versions of these documents, and you have to adjust your capitalization table. And again, if you don't know what a cap table is, go watch those videos. But if you adjust your cap table, that essentially keeps track of who you've handed options out to. You don't want to lose track of that because folks may appear later in your company's evolution saying, hey, I was given options, and you may not know that if you're not keeping track. Also, where do those options come from? They usually come from something called an options pool inside the company. So a company will reserve a certain number of shares that they will grant as options out of this options pool. And usually those shares are common stock. They can sometimes be preferred stock, but they're almost always common stock. So why are these even given in the first place? As a quick reminder, options are used to attract and retain employees by providing a financial incentive. If the option is given at a certain price and the stock goes up, then the employee makes money. And again, you can review our options videos if you're unfamiliar with how options work. And also there's a deferred tax liability in options. It's instead of giving an employee cash or shares that are worth something that the IRS would then consider a tax liability, options aren't worth anything until you decide to exercise the options. So there's a deferred tax liability. You don't pay taxes on that grant. So let's go take a look at an actual stock option grant and sort of keep these things in mind as we go through the document: the date, the vesting, the exercise price, the expiration. So here's our document, and we're going to scroll through it here. You'll notice it's a grant of stock options. And the first thing you see, we don't have to read through this whole thing, but the first thing you see is the name, the address, the date of the grant, when does the vesting begin, are the shares, what's the exercise price, and then what's the expiration date. Those are some of the key things we talked about earlier. You'll see the type of option. Is it an incentive stock option or a non-statutory stock option? Call those non-quals. And then also a vesting schedule. You'll notice right here they're talking about how the options vest. 25% subject to the option vest on the 1-year anniversary. That's called a cliff. And 1/48 of the share subject to the option vest each month thereafter. That simply means you get a little bit at a time over time. Then there's the exercise schedule. When are you allowed to exercise? And then when you do exercise, how? Is it cash? Is it deferred payment? Is there something called a net exercise? So that's essentially it, really, for the stock option grant itself. It's just this small document that says, hey, here are the rules. But remember, it refers to all those other documents. We talked about the exercise notice, the equity incentive plan, and the investment representation statement. So let's look at what else is attached to this one. In this case, this is your equity incentive plan. Now this is a long document that lays out grant rules, investing rules, and exercise rules. And I'm sorry, I'm going to skip through this here. Method of payments, some of the securities laws, representation laws, can you transfer them? Can you resell them? What's the term? What are the tax implications? There's a 409A, which is an IRS code that relates to options. So if we scroll through this, you'll notice that there's a signature line here, meaning the person has to acknowledge that those are the rules associated with their grant. And then the next document here is the exercise notice that we referred to earlier. And this says, hey, if you're going to exercise, you have to fill this thing out saying, look, I'm going to turn these into shares. And then you fill out saying, these are how many I'm going to exercise, this was my exercise price, and then I deliver payment to the company in order to convert this to shares. Again, this is provided to the grantee so that the grantee can turn these things into shares should they be allowed to, according to the rules. So again, you're going to want the person to sign that and the company to sign that and keep that on file showing that they've created shares. And then the last piece here is the investment representation statement. So this just says, hey, participant is aware of the company's business affairs and financial condition, right? You know who the company is, and you acknowledge and understand that the shares constitute restricted securities, and there are laws associated with those things. So not to go into this in too great detail, but again, you're going to want to get the signature of the grantee in that case. So if I scroll all the way back up to the top of this document, the grant is really just one page. It says, here's how many you get, here's when it starts, these are the vesting rules, and this is the expiration date. And then outside of the grant, you're going to have the equity incentive plan, the exercise notice, and an investment representation statement attached so that the person who got the options is aware of all those things. So that's what a stock options grant is. It sets rules around how many options a person gets and under what circumstances they can exercise them and over what period of time.